in the fevered imagination of imperial Rome. Few names evoke dread quite like Caligula, a ruler whose reign burned brightly and briefly, leaving behind a legacy soaked in cruelty, paranoia, and theatrical excess. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, he ascended the throne amid public joy. Hailed as the beloved son of the heroic general Germanicus, for a fleeting moment, Rome believed it had found a benevolent princeps, a young emperor who would restore dignity and fairness after the cold repression of Tiberius. That illusion shattered rapidly. As Caligula's mind darkened, his court transformed into a stage for humiliation, fear, and arbitrary violence. And among the most horrifying aspects of his tyranny were his actions toward women, especially those bound by vows of purity, honor, and religious sanctity. In Roman society, virginity was not merely a private state of the body. It was a public symbol of moral order, family honor, and divine favor. To violate a virgin, particularly one associated with sacred duties, was to assault the foundations of Roman belief itself. Caligula understood this power all too well, and he wielded it with deliberate malice. Roman culture placed extraordinary weight on female chastity, especially before marriage. A virgin daughter embodied the virtue of her household, and her purity was thought to reflect the discipline and honor of her male relatives. Beyond this social layer existed an even more revered category: the Vestal Virgins. These priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the hearth, were sworn to 30 years of chastity and entrusted with maintaining the sacred fire that symbolized Rome as eternal life. They enjoyed privileges unknown to other women: legal independence, public honor, and seats of distinction at games. Yet their sanctity came at a terrible price. If a Vestal broke her vow, the punishment was death, carried out through live burial, because spilling her blood was considered sacrilegious. Thus, the body of a virgin in Rome was never merely personal. It was political, religious, and symbolic. Caligula's cruelty lay in his willingness to weaponize this symbolism, turning purity into a tool of terror. Ancient sources portray Caligula as a man who delighted in transgression for its own sake. He did not simply abuse power, he flaunted it, savoring the shock and helplessness of his victims. According to historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio, he summoned women of noble birth to the palace under false pretenses, sometimes inviting them with their husbands present. During banquets, he would openly appraise their bodies, commenting on their beauty or lack thereof, with obscene frankness, reducing them to objects before the eyes of Rome's elite. Virgins were not spared. Indeed, their untouched status made them more desirable to him as instruments of domination. To force a virgin was not only an act of sexual violence, but a public declaration that no law, no god, and no tradition could restrain the emperor's will. In Caligula's world, innocence was not protected, was hunted. Some accounts suggest that Caligula ordered the deflowering of young women as a form of punishment or entertainment, stripping them of the very quality that granted them social value. In a society where a woman's future marriage prospects depended heavily on her chastity, such an act was a life sentence of shame. Even if the victim survived physically, her social death was assured. Families were ruined, alliances destroyed, and reputations permanently stained. Caligula understood this consequence and exploited it ruthlessly. Death, swift and final, would have spared these women the prolonged agony of living as symbols of disgrace in a culture that rarely offered redemption. Instead, they were forced to exist as reminders of the emperor's whim, breathing proof that virtue offered no protection against tyranny. Most chilling of all were the rumors surrounding Caligula and the Vestal Virgins. While ancient sources must be read with caution, multiple writers hint at his willingness to violate even the most sacred boundaries. He is said to have accused Vestals of unchastity, not to uphold religious law, but to assert dominance, manipulating trials and punishments to satisfy personal vendettas. In Rome, an accusation against a Vestal was enough to freeze the blood. Conviction meant ritual death, carried out in silence beneath the earth. To use such charges as political theater was an act of profound sacrilege. Whether Caligula personally assaulted Vestals or merely orchestrated their downfall, the terror he inspired among them was real. These women, revered and feared by society, suddenly found themselves as vulnerable as any other subject under a ruler who recognized no higher authority. Caligula's brutality toward virgins also reflected his broader contempt for traditional Roman masculinity and honor. By violating women under the protection of powerful men, senators, generals, priests, he symbolically emasculated his rivals. Each forced act proclaimed that he alone possessed absolute control over bodies, families, and futures. Husbands and fathers were compelled to watch, helpless, as their authority dissolved. In this sense, the violence was not only sexual, but political, designed to terrorize the ruling class into submission. The emperor's bedroom became an extension of the execution ground, and the violation of virgins served the same purpose as public beheadings, a warning etched into memory. Psychologically, Caligula's obsession with purity and defilement may have stemmed from his own fractured identity. Raised amid suspicion and murder, he learned early that survival depended on pleasing monsters. When power finally became his, he mirrored the cruelty he had once feared, amplifying it through performance and excess. Virgins, untouched and idealized, represented everything he was not: uncorrupted, controlled, and socially revered. To break them was to assert mastery over an ideal that mocked his inner chaos. The more sacred the victim, the greater the thrill of destruction. Mercy held no interest for him because mercy would have acknowledged limits, and limits were intolerable to a man who believed himself divine. The aftermath of such acts was often worse than death. Survivors lived under a cloud of suspicion, their worth questioned, their voices silenced. Roman law offered little protection to women assaulted by the powerful, and public sympathy was scarce. Silence was safer than accusation, endurance preferable to resistance. In this bleak reality, death could indeed seem like Mercia, release from the endless consequences of an act one neither chose nor could escape. Caligula's reign thus turned the moral logic of Rome upside down. Purity invited danger, and survival demanded complicity. Caligula was assassinated after less than 4 years on the throne, cut down by members of his own guard. Rome exhaled in relief, eager to bury the memory of his excesses beneath new rituals of stability. Yet the scars remained, etched into histories written by men who struggled to comprehend the depths of his cruelty. The stories of the virgins he destroyed linger as some of the most haunting fragments of that era, not because they are the most graphically violent, but because they reveal a ruler who understood suffering and chose to prolong it. By forcing the innocent to live with irreversible loss, Caligula demonstrated a form of brutality that surpassed execution. In his hands, death was swift and simple. Survival, stripped of honor and hope, became the crueler fate.